they found my son sitting on a curb outside a gas station on Route 9 with a 6-year-old boy and 2 garbage bags full of clothes. His wife had changed the locks while he was dropping my grandson off at school. She left his things in the bags by the mailbox like he was something to be thrown away with the Tuesday trash. My daughter-in-law called it space to heal. My son called me from a stranger's phone because she'd canceled his line that morning. He said, "Mom, I don't know what to do. I don't have anywhere to go." I told him to stay right where he was. He didn't know I'd been watching for 2 years. He didn't know what I owned. And she certainly had no idea that the building where she ran her little empire, the one with her name on the directory, the one she bragged about at every family dinner, had been mine since 2018. The drive from my house in Buckhead took 41 minutes. I didn't rush. I've never rushed. Rushing is for people who aren't prepared, and I have been prepared for most of my adult life. I found them on the curb exactly where he said. My son, 43 years old, sitting with his elbows on his knees looking at the asphalt. My grandson beside him in his school uniform, little clip-on tie still straight, holding a juice box like it was the only normal thing left in the world. He looked up when he heard my car. "Grammy." I didn't cry. I wanted to. But I got out of the car the way I've gotten out of cars in front of every bank, every courtroom, every boardroom I've walked into for 31 years. Steady, deliberate. "What happened?" I asked my son. My voice was calm. He needed it to be calm. He couldn't get the words out right at first. Just pieces. She said the marriage was over. Said she'd filed the papers already. Said the house was in her name. Which it was. I'd known that. I'd warned him. And that he had until noon to collect his things or she'd donate them. He'd gone to pick up my grandson from school and came back to bags on the lawn and a locksmith's van in the driveway. He looked up at me. "Mom," she was smiling. She was standing on the porch, smiling. I looked at my grandson. He was watching me with those careful eyes children get when they've decided the adults around them are not entirely reliable. I crouched down. "You hungry, baby?" He nodded. "Good. I know a place. Get in the car." I loaded the bags myself. My son started to say something about figuring things out, about not wanting to be a burden. I put my hand on his arm. "Get in the car." He got in. The house where I raised him was 20 minutes from that gas station. I'd bought it in 1991 with money I earned myself. No husband, no family inheritance, just 32 years old, and a business that had finally started to breathe. It was mine. No one's name was on it but mine, and no one was ever going to change that. My grandson fell asleep in the back seat before we hit the highway. My son stared out the window. I drove, and I thought. I thought about 2 years ago, when I first started to understand what kind of woman my daughter-in-law actually was. My son had married her 8 years earlier. Lowell met Nadia at a conference in Charlotte and came home talking about her the way men talk when they've already made up their minds. She was sharp, he said. Ambitious. Knew what she wanted. He wasn't wrong. She knew exactly what she wanted. I'd had her background checked inside of a week. I know how that sounds. I don't apologize for it. I'd built Hargrove Property Holdings from 2 rental units and a prayer, and I had watched too many smart people get hollowed out by the wrong partner to leave something like that to optimism. The report came back mostly clean. One thing caught my eye. A former business partner in Raleigh, a woman named Gwen, who'd started a boutique real estate consulting firm with Nadia in 2009. The firm dissolved in 18 months. Gwen had moved back to her hometown in Ohio. I found her number and called her. She picked up on the 3rd ring. When I told her who I was, she went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was wondering if someone would call eventually." Gwen told me the firm hadn't dissolved. Nadia had pushed her out, forged a document transferring Gwen's equity stake, moved their shared client list under a new entity registered solely in Nadia's name, and had the nerve to send Gwen a certified letter stating that she, Nadia, was the sole founder of the business they had built together. Gwen had consulted a lawyer. The lawyer told her what lawyers sometimes tell people who are right but not wealthy, that the cost of the fight would likely exceed what she'd recover. She went back to Ohio. She started over. I thanked her. I told her I would be in touch. Then I went home and I made a decision. My son didn't know I owned the Denmore Commerce Center on Peachtree Industrial. He'd never had reason to know. It was one of 9 commercial properties in my portfolio, held through a holdings LLC that was itself held through 2 trusts. Hargrove Property Holdings was my public face. The trusts were my foundation. I'd structured it that way on purpose, 30 years ago, after a business partner tried to leverage my assets in a deal I hadn't agreed to. I learned then that the only protection that matters is the kind nobody can see until it's too late to do anything about it. The Denmore Center was where Nadia operated, Callaway Meridian Group, the consulting firm she'd spent the last 6 years building. She leased the entire 9th floor, 4,200 square feet. She'd signed the lease through a management company I controlled, the same way I controlled all of it, through layers that were perfectly legal and completely invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. She had no idea. I let her think she'd built something. I watched. I needed to know what kind of woman she was. I needed to know what kind of mother she would be to my grandson. I needed to know whether I was wrong about her. I was not wrong about her. The night I brought my son home, after he'd eaten and my grandson was asleep in the room that used to be my son's, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I made 2 calls. The first was to my attorney, a woman I'd worked with for 19 years, precise and relentless. The second was to the man who handled my property management accounts, a man I'd known since before the Denmore Center existed. After those calls, I poured the rest of the coffee down the sink and went to bed. I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't worried. I had everything I needed. I just had to wait for the right moment. The right moment, it turned out, came to me. 3 days after I brought my son home, Nadia filed for emergency sole custody of my grandson. Her attorneys cited my son's unstable housing situation. She told the court he was living out of garbage bags in a stranger's home. She did not mention that the stranger was his mother, or that the home had been paid off since 2004, or that my grandson had his own room there, with a bed and a dresser and a window that looked out over a backyard where I'd hung a tire swing the previous summer. She also filed a police report the same afternoon, alleged that my son had taken $15,000 from their joint account without her knowledge before the separation. Her attorney called it dissipation of marital assets. I sat with my son in my kitchen while he read me the paperwork over the phone. He sounded hollowed out, like he was trying to understand the rules of a game no one had told him he was playing. "Mom, I didn't take any money. I haven't touched that account in 3 months." She told me to stop using it, that she was restructuring the finances. I didn't ask questions. "I know," I said. He was quiet. "How do you know?" "Because I know her," I said, "and because the money she's accusing you of taking was wired to an account in her cousin's name in Savannah 4 months ago. I have the bank records." He was very still for a moment. "How do you have bank records?" I had a forensic accountant quietly reviewing their shared financial activity since the previous year, when I started to notice what Nadia was doing. I'd been patient, built the file slowly. By the time she filed that police report, I had documentation going back 22 months. "There's more," I said, "and I'm going to need you to sit with me tonight and hear all of it." He came over. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. I showed him everything. The Raleigh partner she'd pushed out. The money moved to Savannah. A credit card opened in his name without his knowledge. A balance of just under $9,000. Charges going back 18 months. A life insurance policy she'd taken out on him 2 years ago, with herself as sole beneficiary and a payout of $1.2 million. That last one made him go very quiet. "She told me it was something her financial advisor recommended," he said slowly. "She handled all of it. I signed something. I don't remember exactly what." He looked at me. "Mom, what is this?" I kept my voice steady. "I think she was planning this for a long time." He put his face in his hands. I waited. After a while, he looked up. "What do we do?" I told him. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. That gave me time. I started with the lease. My property manager sent a certified letter to Callaway Meridian Group on behalf of the Hargrove Denmore Trust, citing a provision in their lease agreement related to fraud, financial misrepresentation, and conduct prejudicial to other tenants. It was a real clause. It was in the original lease. Nadia's attorney had reviewed the lease before she signed it. I wondered sometimes if he'd noticed that clause, or if he'd simply assumed it was boilerplate. It was not boilerplate. The letter gave her 60 days to vacate. Along with the letter, I had my management company notify the building's preferred vendor network, the caterers, the parking service, the executive floor amenities, that effective immediately all services to the 9th floor were suspended pending a facilities review. Her corporate card for building services stopped working the same afternoon. 2 days after the letter, I sat in my attorney's office reviewing a second filing. This one was ours. My attorney had spent 10 days building a response to the custody petition that included the forensic account analysis, the fraudulent credit card, the wire transfers, the life insurance policy, and a declaration from Gwen in Ohio, who had agreed to provide a sworn statement about what Nadia had done to her in Raleigh. Gwen had driven up from Ohio to sign it in person. When I thanked her, she said, "I've been waiting 8 years to do something with this. I'm glad it counts for something now." My attorney looked up from the file. With this volume of documented financial misconduct and the pattern it establishes, the custody argument collapses. She paused. "But I want to prepare you for something. Nadia is going to come at your son hard when she realizes what's in our filing. People like her don't accept defeat quietly." "I know," I said. She came hard 3 days later. My son called me at 7 in the morning. Nadia had called him at 6:30. She knew about our filing. Her voice on the call, he told me, had been very calm, controlled. She said she was willing to resolve everything quietly. All she needed was for him to sign a document stating that the credit card and the Savannah wire transfers had been authorized by him. In exchange, she would withdraw the theft allegation and offer him reasonable visitation. "Visitation," he said. She called it visitation. Like I'm some uncle who shows up at Christmas. She also said, according to my son, that if he didn't sign, she would find a way to make things difficult for his mother. She said she knew things about how I operated my business. Said she'd been talking to people. I asked him if he'd recorded the call. He had. I'd asked him a week earlier to record everything. I called my attorney. Then I called a contact at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. We had the recorded call, the forensic file, and now a documented attempt to coerce a witness in an ongoing custody proceeding. My attorney said what she almost never says out loud. Now we have everything. There was an event 2 weeks later. The Atlanta Business Alliance Annual Gala, held every April at the Four Seasons in Midtown. I'd attended for 16 consecutive years. That year I was on the host committee. My name was in the program. Nadia had been nominated for the Alliance's Rising Entrepreneur Award. She'd been campaigning for it for 8 months. It was to be presented at the gala dinner. I called the Alliance's executive director, a woman I'd served alongside on the board for 7 years. "Don't cancel the award," I said. "Let the evening proceed as planned." She was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, what are you planning?" I said. "Let the evening proceed." She trusted me. "I'd earned that trust over many years," she said. "All right." I arrived that night in a dark green dress, simple cut. Flat shoes, because I've long since stopped performing for rooms that already know who I am. My son was with me. He'd been uncertain about coming. I'd told him he'd want to be there. He trusted me. He'd earned that trust over 43 years. We sat near the back. I'd arranged for someone I trusted, a young man who handled audio-visual work for my company events, to be in the technical booth that evening. He'd been briefed. He knew the timing. He knew what to play and when. Nadia accepted her award at 8:47. She looked beautiful, I'll give her that. She wore a red dress and spoke without notes. She thanked the Alliance. She talked about building something from nothing, about the cost of ambition, about what it meant to be a woman creating legacy in a city that didn't always make room for you. She was very good. She almost made me feel something other than what I felt. Almost. At 8:53, I sent a single text. One word, now. The ballroom screens, which had been displaying a slide of her award citation, flickered once. Then the documents appeared. The fraudulent credit card. Account number, 22 months of charges, her signature on the application. Side by side with my son's signature on their mortgage, a signature any graphologist could see was different. 19 pages of bank records, the wire transfers to Savannah, the amounts, the dates, the receiving account. A letter from Gwen's attorney in Raleigh, filed in 2010, the year Nadia had moved to Atlanta and started over. Gwen's sworn declaration. And at the end, the transcript of the phone call. Her voice, her words, formatted in clean black type across the screen for 300 people to read. If you don't sign, I will find a way to make things difficult for your mother. The room went completely silent. Nadia stood at the podium with the Crystal Award in her hands, and she looked at the screens and I watched her understand what was happening. It took about 4 seconds. I counted. Then she looked out at the room and she looked at me. I didn't move. I held her gaze the way I've held the gaze of every person who ever underestimated me. Steady. Patient. Finished. She said something into the microphone. I couldn't hear it. The audio had been cut at 8:54. The alliance director stood from her table. 2 men from the event security team moved toward the stage. My son put his hand on my arm, not to stop me, just to be touching something solid. Chief Brennan of the Atlanta PD had been briefed 2 days earlier. He was not at the gala, but 2 of his detectives were, seated at a table near the exit. I'd arranged that too. They approached the stage as the room began to come back to life around them, voices rising, chairs scraping, phones appearing from pockets and evening bags. Nadia came down from the stage, and the detectives met her at the bottom step. She looked at me one more time as they walked her toward the side exit. Her face had moved through several things in the past 4 minutes: shock, calculation, something that might have been fear, and then, briefly, something I recognized as the look of someone who has finally been seen for exactly what they are. They walked her out. The room erupted. My son was very still. Then he said quietly, "Mom, how long have you known?" 2 years, I said. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you needed to see it yourself," I said, "and because I needed to be ready." He nodded slowly. He understood. He'd always been perceptive. I'd raised him to be. The custody hearing was 6 weeks later. By then, Nadia faced criminal charges in Fulton County for fraud, identity theft, and witness tampering, and Gwen's attorney had filed a civil suit in Wake County, North Carolina, that had been dormant for 8 years, now revived with Gwen's fresh declaration and my financial records as support. The family court judge reviewed the filings. She reviewed the forensic analysis. She reviewed the documented pattern of financial control, the fraudulent accounts, the attempt to manipulate the custody proceeding. She awarded my son primary physical custody of my grandson, with supervised visitation for Nadia pending resolution of the criminal proceedings. She also issued a protective order. My son cried in the hallway outside the courtroom. He held my grandson and cried. My grandson patted him on the back with his small hand like he'd seen adults do to comfort each other, which is exactly what he'd seen, and it was one of the most heartbreaking and hopeful things I have ever witnessed. I stood to the side and gave them space. Then my grandson looked over his father's shoulder and held out one arm. "Grammy, come here." I went. 3 months later, I sat in the office of a nonprofit attorney, helping to establish the papers for something my son and Gwen had been quietly building together. They'd talked on the phone a dozen times since the gala. Gwen had driven back up to Atlanta. My son, who ran operations for a mid-size logistics company and had more organizational experience than he gave himself credit for, had offered to help her build out something she'd been thinking about for years. They called it the Groundwork Fund. Its purpose was legal and financial assistance for people, men and women, targeted by economic abuse within intimate partnerships. The kind of abuse that leaves no bruises. The kind that takes your name, your credit, your savings, sometimes your business, and leaves you sitting on a curb, outside a gas station, trying to explain to a 6-year-old why you only have 2 bags. Gwen would run it. My son would chair the board. I made the first major gift. The afternoon the paperwork was filed, I drove to a park near my house. There's a pond there, and a walking path, and a little wooden dock where I've gone to think since my son was small. I sat on that dock for a while. My grandson had his second baseball game of the season that Saturday. My son had already texted me a picture from the morning's practice. My grandson in his red jersey, mitt on, squinting into the sun with the particular seriousness of a child who has decided that this right now is the most important thing in the world. I looked at that picture for a long time. People talk about revenge like it's a destination, like you arrive somewhere and you look around and you feel full. I've never found that to be true. What I felt sitting on that dock was not fullness exactly. It was closer to what I feel at the end of a very long negotiation, when both sides finally see the terms clearly and there's nothing left to argue about. She had tried to use my son's trust against him. She had tried to use the systems, the courts, the banks, the police, as weapons. She had tried to use my grandson's stability as leverage. And in the end, what undid her was the same thing that's undone every person who ever came at my family, thinking I wasn't paying attention. The assumption that because I was quiet, I was absent. That because I hadn't announced myself, I wasn't already there. I had been there the whole time. That evening, I drove to the baseball field. My son was standing along the third base line with the other parents. My grandson was in right field, shading his eyes against the late sun, waiting. I found a spot in the bleachers. The woman next to me smiled and made room. I thanked her. The pitcher wound up. The ball came in. My grandson did not get that one, or the next. But on the third pitch, there was a solid crack, and the ball went high and deep into right center, and he took 3 running steps, and he caught it, clean and sure, and he held it up in his mitt like a question and an answer at the same time. The bleachers around me cheered. I didn't cheer. I just watched him run back toward the infield, grinning now that Mitt held out in front of him. Some things you build in plain sight. Some things you build in the quiet. Both take time. Both take patience. Both require that you understand the difference and what is actually there. I built my company in 31 years. I built my family in 43. In the morning my son called me from a stranger's phone outside a gas station on Route 9. Everything I had ever built was already in place, waiting. I was always going to be ready.